certain provisions of the open meeting law, general laws, chapter 30A, section 18 of the governor's March 15th, 2020 order, imposing strict limitation on the number of people that may gather in one place. This meeting of the town of Chelmsford Finance Committee will be conducted via remote participation to the greatest extent possible. Specific information and the general guidelines for remote participation by members of the public and or parties with a right and or requirement to attend this meeting can be found on the town's website at www.chelmsfordma.gov. For this meeting, and members of the public who wish to watch the meeting may do so by accessing the Chelmsford Telemedia website at www.chelmsfordtv.org. No in-person attendance of members of the public will be permitted, but every effort will be made to ensure that the public can adequately access the proceedings in real time via technological means. In the event we are unable to do so, despite best efforts, we will post on the town's website an audio or video recording, transcript, or other comprehensive record of proceedings as soon as possible after the meeting. I also like to note that if you'd like to watch this meeting but not plan to present to the committee or speak during public comment, we ask you please do so at live.chelmsfordtv.org or on your television, Comcast 99, Verizon 37. By doing so, you will help reduce demand on the online meeting platform. And then finally, just as a reminder, the chat, although has a private function, is all public and it will be part of the record as a part of this evening's proceeding. So anything typed in there will not be private, it will be part of public record. Now that we've called to order, our first item on the agenda is approval of minutes. Has everyone had a chance to review the minutes that Pam sent out?
Yes, I did.
Yes.
A couple yeses.
Yes.
All right. And then you didn't have a chance to look at them yet? Okay. Seeing as
So you guys can do a vote, right?
we can, but
Yeah.
me and Kathy aren't on either. And so I would just suggest we hold off and just vote on them next week, if that's okay with everybody else.
Fine with me.
Yes. Fine.
All right. Moving right along, we have a review and discussion of the town manager's draft fiscal year 2022 recommended operating budget, and then that'll follow into a draft annual spring town meeting warrant articles. So John, I know that you're going to be sharing and going through the slides for the presentation, and I'll buy Paul some time because it looks like he's just finishing up a phone call here.
Sure.
Just as a preview for our agenda coming up, just remind everybody, although we don't have Amina or Kathy's coming in right now, we do have on a reorganization discussion vote that'll come after our presentation for this evening. So it looks like Paul might be ready, and we can go forward with the presentation. Thank you.
Thank you. Good evening, members of the Finance Committee, and I guess welcome to the 2021 town meeting season, spring town meeting season, and the fiscal year 22 operating budget. What I'm going to present this evening is my formal report that I sent to you back a few weeks ago in accordance with the town's bylaws and charter. It's the proposed operating and capital budgets. I'll basically primarily address the operating budgets, and then John Souza, who chairs the capital planning committee, will get into detail about the capital budgets. And again, since it's been only about a month since we had our tri-board meeting, which again was an altered schedule because of the COVID situation, some of the slides you'll recognize because they were what we were sort of capturing upon as we were entering into the season. So I beg your indulgence for some rapidity, but I always assume two things. One is, those who may be watching this meeting or seeing this document may not have attended or participated in the tri-board meeting back in January, but also it's just good to have everything concise in one place. So with that, we'll get started. And again, I thank John for assisting with the push through of the slides. So again, the highlights of the budget, we're utilizing the entire Proposition 2.5 levy limit as per the discussion that took place at the tri-board meeting with the school committee and select board last month. And again, there's still obviously a lot of uncertainty of what's going on with state and local aid. And as we get into the budget highlights, and with that is two things. One is in accordance with the state guidelines, Governor Baker released his proposed fiscal year 2022 state operating budget just about 3 weeks ago now at the third Wednesday in September, and January. And his budget is now heading off to the legislature. But at this point, the legislature hasn't even assembled their new committee assignments with the new session. Although there isn't expected to be much turnover, the big focus right now, once the committees get established, will be following the revenue trends during this unprecedented period as a result of the COVID vaccine and the economic fallout from that. Thus far, if you've followed it in media accounts, the state revenues are actually tracking better than in forecast, and actually better than they were a year ago at this time, despite the pandemic. But there is expectations that will moderate over the months ahead, particularly as we head into the state's tax collection season for income tax in the next few months. And also the other big uncertainty is what's going to come to us from Washington in terms of the stimulus aid. On the meeting that I was held today with the president of the Mass Municipal Association, the expectation is in March, there will be a federal stimulus bill and money will go to the states as well as municipal governments such as Chelmsford. It's just not clear at this point in time how that money will be distributed, from the state or perhaps either through the state to the local level. So there's a lot of uncertainty, and we also just don't know what the provisions on those funds would be in terms of periods and so forth. But obviously it's encouraging that there may be some assistance in terms of local government operations along the way. As you know, a lot of the debate is still ongoing, and again, once we get clarity, we'll provide that to you. So with that as a prologue, coming into the budget right now, we've got a proposed budget of $144.2 million, just under 4%. The notable items on that are the Chelmsford Public Schools. Per the discussion we had last month, I funded the public schools under my proposed budget at $65 million, which basically brings them to that level that they would have been but for the extraordinary circumstances a year ago. So in terms of dollar increase in the budget, it's $3.3 million and it's 5.4%. In terms of the general government departments, i.e. the other budgets of the town, the other departments of the town, the budget's roughly half that, or $32 million. And it goes up just over $1 million, or 3.4%. And then the Nashoba Tech assessment is now proposed. The tech school has released their proposed budget. They've held the public hearing. And I'm pleased to say that, at least the estimate that I had was pretty much on the mark. I was a couple $1,000s away. And honestly, I had no advance tip off from the superintendent or clues. It was just sort of looking, basically in terms of enrollment trends and sort of budget history. So again, we now have a handle on the Nashoba budget as opposed to a forecast. The big cost driver, obviously, in budgets are benefits and insurance. We're almost at $27 million now, and that's an increase of over 5% or $1.4 million. We have not received our specific rates for our active and retiree employees, but we're as you'll see in upcoming slides, we're using a realistic estimate and based on what trends we're seeing out there. And then the good news is debt service, it continues to decline in terms of a relative in recent years and even historically. So our debt service out of the $144 million is less than $13 million, which is almost a $750,000 drop from the current fiscal year, or over 5.8%. So that's sort of it in big picture. Now to go a little more into detail, again, more detailed, we're maintaining, it's a level service budget. There are no new positions proposed in the general government side. We'll see the school's proposal, I believe they're having their release next week. And the capital infrastructure, which John will discuss later, is at just under $4 million at $3.9 million. The priorities have remained constant. They pretty much follow the, I guess what's now referred to as the vision and values of the community, but basically the whole core of what we try to do here in Chelmsford. Prioritize education. Public safety is essential to our operations, and that includes not only police and fire, but even the public works, particularly this time of the year with road safety, salting, de-icing, potholes, and infrastructure. So certainly want to maintain our capital infrastructure, both the visible on the surface, but also what's not seen below the surface, whether it's in the boiler rooms of buildings or infrastructure under the ground. And obviously the paramount one right now is public health and human services. And again, I think this clearly has shown us the importance of public health, but also really shows us, I believe, the excellent performance of our public health department and really how adeptly they're responding to this crisis and really what is a whole town-wide effort. Sue Roser and the Board of Health are doing a fantastic job moving us through this COVID crisis with testing and clinics, but they're getting a lot of support from all aspects of the town, from emergency management, police, fire, public works, what have you. It's really been a great effort. And we, honestly, at this point, we wish we could just get more vaccines to put more vaccines into people's arms. But again, it's certainly a priority and something that we recognize and have recognized over the years. Moving into more specifics in terms of the budget line items, again, we're seeing about a $5.4 million increase. Again, about 60% of that is in the schools with over $3.3 million. And then about 25% of that is for benefits and insurance, the $1.4 million. And so again, we see a little bit of an outlier in terms of the increase in public works, but that really is driven by solid waste collection and disposal. Everything else is pretty much in line. Again, noting the debt service going down helps us as we move forward. And again, the footnote at the bottom, this budget does not include funding for any unresolved collective bargaining agreements, although we do have a placeholder on the warrant in the event that were to occur. Revenue summary, again, 144.2 million. Biggest increases in revenue are certainly the property tax, as we mentioned earlier, unlike this past year where we took $2 million from our stabilization fund to address the COVID pandemic and the fiscal uncertainty. At this point, we're going to the full levy limit for the budget we'll bring to town meeting this spring. And therefore that makes it a larger increase. And that's why you see the available funds decrease on the corresponding to that. And then we see a modest increase in state aid, which I'll get into a little bit later. And I guess an optimistic forecast for local receipts, assuming there's, as we're hoping, there's a sort of bubble or burst that comes out once the pandemic conditions are lifted. Because remember, this budget period goes from July 1st through next June 30th. And we're hopeful by the fall, certainly, and certainly before the end of the next fiscal year, that we'll have emerged from the pandemic and that, there'll be more economic activity, more travel, more dining, and so forth. So that's basically the fundamentals of what this budget is based upon. Drilling a little deeper into the individual departmental expenditures, again, I try to look at it over a period of time in terms of how are we trending, and we do this annually, and you can see on a 5-year trend. Again, the money goes to the larger departments. That's expected. That's why they are the larger departments. So over 5 years, you can see we're adding about $2 million per year into the public schools. The benefits and insurance, again, the second biggest driver, roughly $1 million per year. So the increases that I spoke about just a moment ago have really been historic over the last 5 years. And again, you see the debt service dropping over 5 years by 10%. So that's sort of the big picture. And then if you go to the next slide, you sort of see over 10 years, you can just sort of see, again, the same consistency. The schools are up over 10-year period, about $2 million per year, non-compounded, so roughly there's, $20 million, public safety up about $500,000 per year, benefits and insurance, $1 million per year. And you can see the debt service, even over a 10-year period, is slightly less than it was a decade ago. And certainly in real dollars, again, the numbers are less. So again, not surprising because, you're in the community, you can see that we really haven't been any major projects, and certainly not a school project. A school project would skew these numbers in debt service significantly. It would probably basically double our debt service. So unlike most of our neighboring communities, we're not at the point where we've made what we call a whole school investment. But that obviously means that we're positioned to, in the event that were to be an opportunity in the future. Moving ahead into the school budget line item, again, as I mentioned earlier, 65 million. We provide that, sort of restoration in coming back to the full level by taking that $1.3 million that would have otherwise been in the year. And on the next slide, you sort of see that anomaly for 21. And so again, if you add 21 and 22, we're at the $2 million per year increase in funding. Moving to the other component, which is always a big story, and I don't think we can ever emphasize this enough, is the Chapter 70 funding history. And you can see the trend, and I'll actually provide you a verbal number, but basically we're getting $30 per student in recent years, $150,000. In fact, the governor's budget basically had us right at that. His number was for fiscal 22 goes from 11,200,000 to 11,350,000 roughly. So we're back on that cycle of $30 per student under the governor's proposed budget for 22. Certainly the end budget that comes out of the legislature won't be any worse than that. The governor is committed in his budget, and we expect the legislature would do as well, to implement the new education reform law, full funding, Student Opportunities Act. Unfortunately, Chelmsford is a minimum community, so at this point, they're only funding minimum communities at $30 per student. So again, we took a year of 0, and then we go back to a $30 per student. So they don't do a makeup. We're still at 150. It's actually less than 150, probably because of the decline of enrollment. The number is actually 11,348,108. So I think it just follows the number of students. Moving on to the next slide in terms of how that's affecting in terms of our obligations under net school spending. Well, certainly if the budget's growing at $2 million per year and the state's only providing 150,000 and they're not obviously requiring investment greater than a proportion to what they're providing historically, then our net school spending continues to grow over our requirement. In fact, the number for fiscal 22 under the governor's budget, and again, it's just the governor's, is $56,132,341. So you can see it goes up by just over $1 million. And as I just mentioned earlier, we're providing an increase of $3.3 million. That's just in the budget. Now, if you go to net school spending in terms of other costs like facilities and others, I would venture to say that when we're sitting here a year from now, the net school spending for fiscal 22, the amount over requirement will probably be closer to 40%. It only really means something when you're a community that's at the threshold, because that's a requirement. So this, as the superintendent has often discussed, it sort of loses its meaning in a community like Chelmsford in terms of what would be required to fund our schools at. So, but going again, drilling down a little deeper in terms of the next slide of per pupil expenditures. I just put this on here to just to show what it costs per student. And roughly right now, my estimate is the net per pupil expenditure, 19 is the last official data, because again, it's gathered at the end of the fiscal year by the state. And again, it's a few months after the end of the fiscal year. So I would expect the 20 numbers should be out pretty soon for the fiscal year that ended last June 30th. But my guess is they're probably still waiting for some communities to report. Which actually is a little late, but it happens every year. But again, if we're looking in the current year, we're probably exceeding $16,000 per student. And I hope that gives people a perspective in terms of, the impact on the taxes in the community and just the cost and value of education, particularly if you're even looking at higher education. I mean, again, you're spending $16,000 for a student in the Chelmsford Public Schools per year. And what that means, and I always use this slide to kind of just equate it to what somebody could understand, is that if you look at it over a 180-day school year, it's roughly $90 a day to send a student to school in Chelmsford. And if you look at it in terms of a classroom cost, it's roughly $350,000. And if you look at it over the whole 180 school days, it's roughly $2,000 per day for a classroom of students for education. And then obviously we then look at comparisons to other communities to sort of see, well, how do we, compare in terms of, are we, meeting our obligations or and the way we look at this, these comparable communities are actually developed by the state. The Massachusetts Department of Elementary and Secondary Education annually develops a list of 10 comparable communities. And then I always provide the data for our neighboring communities that are similar but not comparable under the state's formula. And I think this is probably better seen on the next slide, which is a chart. And so again, you can see that Chelmsford's right in the middle. if you look at our per pupil expenditure, as I said, we're right in the middle of these comparable communities. You can see Burlington at the high end on the right has the highest per pupil expenditure, and Dracut on the left would be the lowest of this data group. So, we're sort of that middle class and middle among our peers type of community. If you then move to the next slide, we then sort of look at data in terms of special education costs, in terms of circuit breaker as a measure, which is circuit breaker are those extraordinary costs that really are kids who are moved out of the classroom into special services of usually of a nature that's over $30,000 per year, and the state reimbursed 75% of the excess. And it gives us a sense, because there's always been this sense over time that perhaps people move to Chelmsford for special ed, or that we have that there's a cost driver in our community. So again, if you look at comparable data on the next chart for these same communities, you can see that we do tend to skew in terms of circuit breaker towards the upper end. Once again, Burlington being at the top, which may equate obviously to the higher per pupil expenditure in the earlier chart. And you can see Billerica towards the lower end, North Attleboro. Again, it just gives a sense of where we are as on that metric. Again, all metrics are just a snapshot or an insight into the big picture. One of the other data we use are per pupil student teacher ratios. And again, we look at it over time in terms of the number of teachers, our enrollment. Obviously, the significant thing with enrollment is it's dropped over time, although we did have an increase in fiscal year 20. And obviously, we know that's going down in fiscal 21 because of COVID, with people electing to keep children out of the public schools, either the private schools or homeschooling. But the bottom line is, on the latest data that's in the state's database, you can see that our student teacher ratio is 13.6. And again, that's been holding relatively steady over time, and certainly improved from where we were a decade ago in the early part of the teens decade of this. And again, if you look at it in the next chart into our comparable communities, again, I provide the data, which again is better viewed in a chart, which on the next slide, which I think that, and you can see that Chelmsford again is towards the middle. The student teacher ratio is right around the midpoint, with Dracut having the higher amount, meaning more students per teacher. And again, Burlington, as we noted earlier, being the outlier, having the lowest student teacher ratio. So again, looking at these things and again, seeing it over time, you can sort of see that what's happening in Chelmsford has pretty much been happening amongst us, and we're in our peer group. You look at student teacher ratio, again, now going towards average class size, you can see that's declining. Again, obviously that's a measure of classrooms, attendance. Basically, part of that I think can be attributed to declining enrollment over time, and also the fact that the teacher enrollment has been steady, if not some slight additions. And again, if you look at it in terms of our peers on the next slide, and then looking at it in a chart, again, you can see that Chelmsford actually is on the lower end, in the sense that our average class size is not obviously quite where Burlington is, but really tends to be on the lower end, which is the whole issue of how many kids on average. Now, again, it's an average, but it's a metric, as opposed to a community like Melrose or Dracut on the other end. So again, I think it reflects the values of Chelmsford, and sort of the whole target of Chelmsford always sort of wanting to be sort of around the midpoint, which means you're competitive in driving that. Moving along to this, the next slide of the budget drivers in the school budget. And again, Dr. Lang highlighted these when we had our tri-board meeting, and you'll see much more detail in the school department budget. But again, when we look at their cost drivers and the one-time funds that they applied, that's roughly around the $3.3 million that I have allocated towards the Chelmsford Public Schools. Moving on to Nashoba Tech. As I mentioned at the outset, they have released their assessment. My estimate was 3,725 when I released this document. Their actual assessment for Chelmsford is 3,721,402. So again, I was within a few thousand. But it just goes to show you that the increase is still over 8%, roughly $275,000 of an increase. And that's driven by enrollment. And I've sent to you, and I know it's available on the district's website, their budget pack presentation, and the enrollment numbers and data are there. But the key message is that Chelmsford's enrollment is increasing. We now have 212 students as of last October 1st attending the vocational school. And meanwhile, the district's enrollment is increased to, I think the actual number in their figures is 667. So they actually had 13 more students. But what that means is that as our enrollment increases relative to the district, our share of the fixed costs and the budget increases. And it went from 30.58% to actually 31.78 based on the 667 number. So again, you have the increased assessment based on the ongoing budget. Then when you provide the budget increase, based upon that adjustment, it comes out to roughly an increase of $275,000 at 3.721 million is based on what is out there. And again, if you like we did in the Chelmsford Public Schools, it's the opposite trend of enrollment. In Nashoba Tech, it's significantly increasing. And right now, again, we've got 11 students more than a year ago and 28 more students than 5 years ago, which is 15% more than 5 years ago. So that's driving the numbers. And again, with the students goes the Chapter 70 aid and so forth. So and also so when I talk about the $30 per student of Chapter 70 funding, well, again, if the Chelmsford enrollment's going down and the Nashoba's is going up, some of the Chapter 70 money is going with them direct to Nashoba. And then looking at their per pupil expenditures, it's higher, and that's because it's a high school. They don't generally, if you look at a school district, your elementary costs are less than your secondary costs. So if you're running just a regional vocational high school, based upon the fact that it's a vocational school as well as the fact that it's only a high school, their costs are greater. You can see the trend going up almost about $1,000 per year. Again, the latest data on the state's website is for fiscal 19. So as we jump to fiscal 21, which is the year we're in right now, my projection is that the cost per pupil to attend at Nashoba Tech exceeds $23,000. Again, that basically means you're getting a $100,000 education if you're going there 4 years. Again, the Nashoba Tech budget drivers are detailed in the Nashoba Tech budget presentation. And so again, I won't spend much time here other than it's what you would expect to see annually. Employee cost of living allowances in terms of their salary schedule, as well as step increases by the fact that educators get more seniority and therefore have a greater value under the step system. And then they also change lanes based upon their academic achievements professionally. And then they have an increased Middlesex County retirement assessment and special ed costs and debt service and so forth, and health insurance. Again, because they're running a whole district as opposed to a department that we'd have in our town. So that sort of summarizes the educational thing. To touch real briefly on public safety, which again was another priority that I noted. Again, you'll have your budgetary meetings with the public safety chiefs, but in this budget, we're maintaining the staffing levels of our police department with 69 full-time officers, 54 of them being sworn officers, 9 dispatchers, clerical support, and building support. And then if you look at the call volume in terms of what's happening on the next slide, you can see that the number of calls for public police assistance is increasing over time. In calendar year 20, there were just almost 37,000 calls. So you can see those trends tend to be increasing over time. You can see sometimes they ebb and flow, but obviously their workload is not diminishing by any means. Again, this is just a rough metric. And in fact, the chief I know can discuss with you details in terms of the nature of the calls. And in fact, he'll be providing, both chiefs will be providing a report to the select board at that next meeting on the 22nd about, a departmental update that gets into the different types of calls, particularly what's happened during COVID and so forth. And on the fire side, it's the same approach. We're maintaining these full-time staffing levels of 63.5 with 52 uniformed firefighters, with 7 captains, the chief and the deputy, and clerical and maintenance support, and maintaining the 11 firefighter per shift minimum. And then in terms of fire calls, I guess the good news is the number of fire calls is diminished in this past year, and certainly diminished from where it was almost 2 years ago. So, and again, it's probably a reflection of a couple of things. If you have COVID, which alters the equation in terms of travel in the community and people and accidents and what's going on the roads. You also, again, have a maturing of your building code and life safety codes over a period of time. Certainly not within 2 years, but the whole idea is, the whole advancement of fire code and safety codes over a period of time. You're just tending to see less activity in terms of structure fires and so forth. So again, the good news there is that we're able to meet the response, and we intend to continue to do so in the future. So once you get beyond that, you look at the other cost drivers in the community, employee compensation. Much like the school department and Nashoba Tech and others, we're a service organization. We provide human services, and so again, our biggest one is our payroll. We provide a 2% cost of living adjustment to our payroll, which roughly increases our personnel expenses by $500,000. Next is employee and retiree health insurance. Again, we're forecasting a 3% increase in health insurance premiums for active and retired employees. We expect our rates again earlier. One of the other things beyond rates is also enrollment. So we can see here that the increase of $785,000 or 6% is driven by enrollment. And you can see, again, the top line of this chart, either visually with the chart above or the numbers below in the chart, you can see that our number of employees has relatively been constant. Again, no change from 21 to 20, but what's really driving it is an increase in retirees. We're 20% where we were a decade ago, when you had 776 retirees, or almost 1,400 total, and now you're at 1,600 total. And I think it's a reality again of of a lot of things. People are retiring. The actuarial tables are extended. Healthcare and everything else. It's leading to more and more retirees in our system. So then, if you look at, well, what does it really cost to provide insurance for an active employee who's on a family HMO type of plan? Right now, the total annual premium is over $25,000, and the town share is almost $20,000. $19,000. So again, in the current year, and then if you forecast it with the 3% increase, it's almost $20,000. So obviously, that's a consideration in terms of the issue of staffing and hiring. It's not only about the wages; it's also about the benefits. And speaking in terms of benefits, the big driver is our Middlesex County retirement. John, is our rep to the retirement board. He's very active in there about their finances and audits and actuarial studies. And as he's reported to us and presented at our previous meetings, our FY22 assessment is $9.88 million, an increase of almost 4%, or $371,000. And again, on the next slide, John provides the detail, the breakout, and we talk about this all the time, and it can never be overemphasized. The big column is that payment on the unfunded liability, which just keeps growing over time. Right now, the normal cost for normal retirement of our system is $1.8 million $1.7 million for 22. It's $8.3 million for the payment on the unfunded liability. And you just see how that grows over time. So our total assessment is over 10 million, but they give you a credit for paying early. So we bring it under 10 million at 9.88 million, but it's still a $371,000 increase. And then you can see for the coming attractions for 23, it's almost double that, because they do 2-year actuarial assessments. So we know that number will increase by $655,000 in the budget for fiscal year 23, as we talked about at the tri-board meeting. So again, the unfunded liability continues to grow, and part of that, again, as we talked about, just to put it in perspective for those watching, it's driven by the fact that you have to have a realistic rate of return on the investments, which actually this year was fantastic, but this was not the typical market return. They're trying to keep it below 7%, even though this year was closer to 11 and 12. But again, they do a rolling basis, and they're trying to be realistic. Again, you have revised actuarial schedules, revised increased payrolls over time, and so forth. That's how it's driving. So when you look at our unfunded pension and OPEB liabilities, they're larger than the town's budget. They total $168 million. Again, 2/3 of that is from the unfunded pension liability, and another third is from the OPEB liability of over $52 million. So our budget has $8.3 million for the assessment, which is mandated and legally required by state law to fund our unfunded pension liability, and then we're applying $1.1 million towards the unfunded OPEB liability. Another driver in terms of more I guess identifiable is solid waste and recycling. There's two components to that. One is collecting the materials, and the other one is disposing of the solid waste. So the solid waste and recycling collection, which are two different activities, as we know, take place in town, actually with two different companies, those costs are increasing by $80,000. And that's pretty much driven by prevailing wage, which is the wage that we're required under the state law to pay market wage rates as established. So that's driving us by $80,000. And then obviously fuel factors that as fuel costs go up, as they are now trending a little bit. And then the other problem, the big problem, and it's a long-term challenge, is that there are fewer and fewer locations to dispose of solid waste, as we spoke of at the tri-board meeting. So again, our tipping cost, meaning that the cost to dispose of a ton of solid waste into the trash to energy facility in Haverhill, is increasing from $74.48 per ton to $90 per ton. And then on top of that, you also have the increased residential solid waste disposals as a result of the pandemic, because people are staying at home, they're dining at home or bringing takeout home, working from home, and so forth. And so, whereas if they're doing it in their workplaces, the town's not responsible for collection at commercial facilities. So we've got the increase in tonnage, the increase in 10% in solid waste. So we're going to collect over 17,000 tons of solid waste in the upcoming fiscal year, and those costs are increasing by a total of $400,000, or roughly a third. So you've got an increase of $480,000, the 80 in the collection and 400 in the disposal cost for solid waste. Moving on to again, other components of the town's budget: property casualty workers' compensation insurance. I think people are pretty much aware the market for property insurance is pretty hot, meaning you're having increased values of property and you're having increased casualties in terms of the property insurance market. And then because of recent trends, you're also having increased claims on law enforcement and public officials' liability. So towards all that end, it adds about 5% or $50,000 to that budget, as well as the fact that our workers' comp budget is also changes with our payroll. In addition, we pay Medicare tax, which again is directly tied to payroll. We'll pay over $1 million in Medicare tax in the upcoming fiscal year. So that's an increase of $46,000 or 4.5%. And then I mentioned earlier about debt service. Again, as noted by Standard & Poor's, our bond rating firm, they clearly note that our debt is, our low overall debt is less than 3% of the market value of the community, and it's rapidly amortizing, meaning that 90% of our debt in the community is going to be retired in 10 years. And that'll pretty much stay constant, bar from anything extraordinary, because if you think about it, our annual capital investment plan is roughly about a 10-year duration. You have some equipment for 5 years, like vehicles and so forth. You have a lot of things at 10, and then you have some perhaps 15 to 20 if they're major building investments. So again, we're sort of at that point now where we're roughly, we have a low debt burden. And then what that means, as shown on the next slide, is that our excluded debt service, meaning that which the voters have excluded from the constraints of Proposition 2.5, that is going to decrease by $460,000 or 13%. And that's mostly the funding in terms of the sewer project. And you can see the decline over time. We're dropping about $500,000 or so, a year in the last couple of years, and even greater than that, a particular year, depending upon the bond cycle for the debt on the sewer project. So clearly that's going away, and it's off the tax books, and it's not coming back, at least not in this form, in terms of if there's investment in sewer in the future. And then the excluded debt service, which, the non-excluded, it decreases also by $312,000. And again, that's really, as I mentioned earlier, it's those items that we fund annually within the levy, mostly our capital plan, although it's for some of the longer term projects like the library and the police station and so forth, falling off the books. We're seeing a decrease there of over $300,000 in the upcoming year. I provide a chart, as I did the last time, in terms of employees, again, just to give a sense of where we are over time. I always start with fiscal 08 because that sort of was the height prior to the Great Recession. We had 241 employees in the general government of the town back then. Right now we have 10 more, over basically a dozen or so years. And then in the school department, same thing. They were at that point, they were just under 700 employees. Now they're basically 782. You can see an increase of 91 in that period. And so it just gives you a sense of over time in terms of what the trends are, and then where the employees are being hired in. And in more recent years, they're being hired in the schools, clearly. So when you look at all these budget drivers on the summary page, you can see how we add up to the $5.5 million. Again, big drivers, as we noted at the outset: school department, health insurance, retirement, Nashoba tech, employee compensation, and then again, we're getting some relief by our non-excluded debt service. When you look to then go to the revenue side of the equation, as I noted briefly at the beginning, property taxes, the story here. Under the provisions of Proposition 2.5, we have 2.65, which is the allowed 2.5% increase under the levy for our existing property tax base. We're projecting $1.6 million in new property growth from new construction and improvements and renovations in the community. We're bringing in the 2.9 in excess levy capacity. As I said, $2 million was the money that we provided from the stabilization fund. And then on top of that, where we had more state aid than we had forecast, there was another $900,000. So we were 2.9 under the levy limit. That's all baked in right now. And then the good news is we're offset by about $500,000 from excluded debt service. And then again, you've got more modest amounts for state aid, local receipts, and available funds, primarily being the state, the money not coming from the stabilization fund. So that gives you the 5.7 available sources. And if you notice, the early number was 5.5 in expenditures. So again, there's a little bit of wiggle room in there for what trends may change. Also, if we settle contracts and so forth. So there is, there is some uncertainty, and also we'll know that the state aid numbers will change over time as the process moves forward in terms of what may happen and some of the assessments for some of the state aid items as well. So again, I also as I looked at revenue expenditure trends over 5 and 10 year periods, I do the same on the revenue side. And just to illustrate a few things, one is the percentage of the budget that's funded by the property tax. So you can see that's increasing over 5 years from almost 76% to almost 79%. And you can see state aid declines as a revenue source over that period. And local receipts would decline, relative, because we really, we really believe we hit our peak a couple of years ago, particularly with motor vehicle, and we'll get into that shortly. And then available funds have been relatively constant when you don't have an anomaly like this past year, 21. So again, sadly, over 5 fiscal years, the annual increase in Chapter 70 funding is roughly about 1% or so a year. We saw that in the Chapter 70 chart that I presented earlier. The Governor Baker has tended to increase. He has increased the unrestricted general government aid, which is about a half of the amount of what's the education funding aid, at the same level of increase in the state budget, which is roughly 3% or so. So that's why that has grown greater than Chapter 70 education funding in the last 5 years. When you look over a 10-year period, the story is relatively the same. You see the same trend. The property tax goes from 74% to 79%. Again, state aid is declining. Your local receipts are actually, are declining as a percentage, but are actually up. Obviously, you'd expect that over a 10-year period, but yet not materially. And then again, you can see over a 10-year period, the Chapter 70 funding, again, is roughly only about 1% per year compounded. And clearly the general government aid is increasing greater. Again, it's a smaller number to increase over at that time. So diving more into the detailed numbers of property tax revenue, again, I spoke of the fact of the base levy and the 2.5% increase. You can see how that's calculated. The base levy for the fiscal year we're in right now is 106 million. So again, you get the 2.5% allowed increase of 2.65 million, and then the new growth of 1.6, which you can see is a conservative and probably realistic projection, because again, we seem like we hit the peak of things back in 20. It went down slightly in 21. You can see the 1.6 number in 22 was actually greater than what we saw in 19 and 18. So even though it's going down, I don't think this is being overly conservative. In fact, we'll probably be in that neighborhood. So that's how you get the 4.25 million, the levy increase and the new growth. Again, going to full levy. If you look at the average single family property tax bill, I always include this in all my presentations. The bill is obviously over $7,400 for the average single family home in the community that's less than $500,000. And again, it just shows you that basically the money goes where the budget is. And 44% of it goes to the school department line item, not all costs of school, but just that line item, because other things like benefits and facilities and so forth support the schools, but by budgetary line items that goes there. Obviously, benefits and insurance is the second largest one. And over 18% of the cost goes to benefits and insurance for current and retired employees. And you can see the others are relatively modest compared to those, and less than 10% of our budget is for debt service. The other thing we look at and monitor over time is property tax valuation, and this is obviously trending towards residential, as we discussed at the tri-board meeting. And it's important to keep emphasizing, because again, the values for fiscal 22 will be the value of property of just over a month ago on January 1st of 2021. And we know that in calendar year 20, that residential property increased greater than commercial property, certainly and significantly, because of the hot residential real estate market, as well as the fact that residential valuation includes multifamily development. So that's why you see that trend now going, towards 83.17. And again, it's probably going to be greater than that in 22, as opposed to if you went back a half dozen years or so, you're at roughly 80-20. So again, it goes to, where is the tax burden falling? So in other words, that's sort of similar to the Nashoba thing, is that even if the budget were to stay the same, if you've got a shifting in valuations, the valuations are going towards residential. And we discussed that at the tri-board meeting in terms of what's likely to happen with the tax rate going forward. And speaking of that, the next slide speaks to average single family property tax bill. Again, as we noted, and I always put this up here, this is like the comparables that we talked about for schools and so forth, and students and our classroom size and so forth. The state rank, Chelmsford's rank, has been relatively constant. Right now, we're number one would be the highest single family property tax bill, which would be, the town of Weston in Massachusetts, we're 72 this year, and we've roughly been around that 68, 70 level, basically for over a solid decade. And what that means is, your taxes are going up in Chelmsford, but they're going up everywhere. And so we're relatively going with the tide. And in fact, if you look over a 5-year increase, it's if you think about a 2.5% per year increase under 2.5, the number isn't tremendously significant. But again, recognizing that in 21, that this was the year that we reduced the levy with the stabilization fund. Again, I do a comparison, much like I did with the other things, with our comparable towns, or in this case, our neighboring towns. And you can see that over a 5-year period, the taxes in Chelmsford went up, and they went up significantly, again, almost $1,000. But if you're living in our neighboring greater Lowell towns of Barica, Drake, Tewksbury, and Westford, the percentage change, of value change, is actually less in Chelmsford than it was in these other towns. Again, that'll narrow because unlike Chelmsford, those other towns went to full levy in 2021. So that'll narrow once we return to full levy at some point in time, if that occurs. But the bottom line is, taxes are going up, but they're going up everywhere. And so obviously, if you're in Westford, you're paying more taxes, 2,000 more. But again, it's going up relative at a higher clip than in Chelmsford. Moving on to state aid, again, this is our estimate at this point in time. And again, there's a long way to go on this. When these numbers were before the governor's release of his budget. So again, that level funded Chapter 70 actually goes up by $150,000. But the bottom line is, the increase in state aid is less than 2%. If you make the adjustments for what the governor proposed. And clearly that's a diminishing part of our budget, and a number of these things are direct offsets. So again, we'll see what happens with the legislature, but I don't foresee any material major change because one, it's a new start of a legislative cycle, and two, they're just, given the uncertainty with COVID and the economic recovery, we just don't see the state coming up with additional funds. Again, we're waiting to see what perhaps federal assistance may do. And if that's the case, will the state, what will come to a town such as Chelmsford? Moving on to local receipts, as I noted earlier, the big part of local receipts is motor vehicle excise. It's roughly half of our local receipts. John had a discussion with me this morning, and I'll share the good news with you. You'll be receiving your motor vehicle excise tax bill soon. The annual commitment will be coming out. Why I note that is not to bring you the pleasure of the seasons, but the important thing to note on that was the commitment, meaning how does the major motor vehicle commitment, which is basically people who own vehicles for the prior year, which comes out always in the February timeframe, as opposed to people who make transactions during the course of the year that come out, sporadically a half dozen times, and some very small commitments during the year. But how does that compare from a year ago? And as we expected, the commitment was roughly 7.5% less than the commitment from a year ago. So are roughly $338,000 less. So as I noted earlier, you can see we hit our peak in fiscal 19 at 5.6 million in motor vehicle excise. And so it looks like that fiscal 21 budget of 4.9 million, which is the year we're in right now, that's about where we'll land up. Again, if you're 338 down on that major commitment, and you're going from 5.3 million of actual to 4.9 of budget. So we're in discussions with John, we're probably going to be at that point around budget at the end of the year. So again, I'm being a bit optimistic here, as I noted a month ago in the tri-board meeting, because I think again, with people getting back out and leases coming up for renewal and more travel, I think we'll see a little bit of heightened activity in motor vehicle excise. Same thing you see me with the meals tax. We're doing okay with meals tax this year. We'll exceed it. And we think that $500,000 is a realistic number. We recognize that a number of places are not going to survive or are not surviving the pandemic. But again, we think we'll get a burst as we come out of the pandemic in fiscal 22. Same thing with permit activity, that's been relatively strong. And then room tax, we're hoping to see some rebound. That once people get back out, they'll travel, stay, visit. So again, we're hoping that our hotels in town, which are relatively modern in terms of the renovations that have occurred up in Drum Hill and also on Chelmsford Street, that when people do travel, that they would tend to stay, in which rather, recently renovated facilities. Again, still wondering what's going to happen with the Radisson, because we're just not seeing anything happen there in terms of renovation, and the facility remains closed. So that's why, we're not getting overly enthusiastic with that. And again, in available funds, again, not much of a story here, that everything is relatively constant. The big one here is the sewer betterments capital fund, but you can see in terms of the dollar change, not much change happening here. Again, to close out, we see a change in inflation. It was 1.2% through November, because obviously that affects our buying power and our operating costs. I do know that the January report that came out was, I think it was 1% higher than that. And so that's something that we'll keep an eye on going forward, because Proposition 2.5 remains regardless of the inflation rate. So it does affect what will be our purchasing authority within the budgets that we have in terms of what's able to be attained. And then as a quick intro to the capital, which John will get into, as I mentioned earlier at the outset, we're funding capital of $3.9 million. We have a slight offset from the Child Care Revolving Fund for a project at the Westland School. So we'll be financing $3.8 million in capital. The next slide just gives you a real broad overview, and John's going to dive into this much deeper in terms of where the money's going. Obviously, the big component, a third of almost a quarter of it goes into school buildings, school technology, public works, are the big drivers there. And then in closing notes, in terms of what can we do, we recognize that the property taxes is increasingly bearing the burden. And I think there's a couple of things. As I noted earlier, if we keep getting $30 per student in Chapter 70 education aid, and we want to maintain the quality of the schools and the quality of the community, something's going to give there. Because otherwise, you're just going to be, just recognizing the fact that we're paying locally for essentially, the large bulk of our education costs, and it's growing per year. The good news is you're not over reliant upon the state aid. The bad news is you're carrying the burden locally. And the same thing with roadway funding. People are frustrated, and we'll hear the frustrations as we move through the budget season when the freezing and the thawing occurs. But if the Chapter 90 roadway tax funds that come from the excise tax on gasoline, if that amount isn't changing, and it hasn't changed in about close to a decade now, then it's not enough to maintain the roads, because it's really only at about a third of what it costs to maintain the over 200 miles of roadway surfaces we have in town. It's going to be a problem, and not to mention the real problem the state's going to have forward, because if we're in a conversion to non-gasoline vehicles by 2035, and there are going to be incentives to do that, it's going to affect this state gasoline excise tax revenue. And right now, it's not clear how that's going to change over time and how it'll be received. And I think we're all expecting it's going to be something based upon miles driven, perhaps done by annual vehicle inspections or what have you. We don't know. But again, that's something that I think has to be considered in the debate in the years ahead. And perhaps there may even be federal money coming in for stimulus in terms of job restoration. Perhaps that may help us if there's stimulus money for roadway construction, the old shovel ready argument of getting people back employed. We'll see what that happens. And then again, the constant message of OPEB reform, that if people can be eligible for our retirement system, having worked for a 10-year period minimum at only 20 hours per week minimum, and that's basically uniform regardless of the tenure, unlike the retirement system, then that's something perhaps that needs to be looked at in terms of if the cost of health insurance is increasing materially, it's obviously an attractive benefit that it will be utilized. So that sort of concludes my overview of the operating budget. Again, I've provided for you and is the detail, page by page, line by line, which you'll go over with the department heads in at your meetings in the weeks ahead. But that's sort of big picture where we're at. And I think the good news is we're we're at least emerging from, the worst of times. And so hopefully, the things will be a little more stable as we go into fiscal 22, given the uncertainty and the real-time adjustments we were making earlier this fiscal year and late at the end of the last fiscal year. So thank you, Mr. Chairman, and
Thanks,
members
Paul.
for your patience.
So Kathy, I'm actually unmuting you now, Kathy. You couldn't unmute. You had a question. Well, I was unmuting you for some. Oh,
Am I unmuted?
Yes, now we can hear you, Kathy.
What a treat for everybody. I just have a kind of an odd question on that slide about interest on late taxes.
Mhm.
Is that is that where the amount is recorded? Say I'm a senior and I defer my taxes until the home is sold. Is that where that interest is recorded, or is that somewhere buried in the overlay account? How does that work?
John will give you the best explanation on that. You got to unmute yourself, John. You're still muted.
you're John.
There we
There you
go.
go. Now
Sorry
you're
about
good.
that. Yes, to answer Kathy's question, generally what you talk about, the senior tax deferral accounts, the interest accrues in those accounts, but it would not show up in this line item unless the senior citizen's property was sold and the tax deferral account was paid off at that time. So this would show, typically we have roughly about 15 of those type of accounts townwide. And some years there are no transfers of property. This current fiscal year, I believe we had one, a condominium was sold that was a senior deferral account. So if the senior citizen, throughout their life and the time they occupy that home, they can continue to defer the taxes. And so you would only see it as a revenue source when the property is sold. If that, hopefully I answered your question.
Yes, that answers my question. But so while it's the property hasn't been sold, the taxes and interest and all that are being deferred, where is that amount recorded that we see on the budgetary items?
It's actually, it wouldn't be in the town operating budget, but our town accountant has that. I report each year when I certify the deferred taxes for each of the seniors, it's reported to the town accountant, and she maintains a
separate
deferred liabilities and deferred revenues, excuse me. And
Okay.
she maintains a separate listing for that.
So what happens is when it does get paid,
I was just curious how that was recorded. I guess it just
because what happens in real time, Kathy, is obviously we budget and commit 100% of the tax levy, but obviously 100% of the tax levy doesn't get collected in a given fiscal year. So what happens is you get prior year amounts that get collected in a year, and similar, these deferrals get collected in a particular year. So that's how it gets recognized in revenue as part of the property tax revenue.
Okay, thank you.
I have a couple of questions, if that's all right.
Yep.
Sorry. Paul, you're on such a roll. I didn't want to interrupt, so I was making notes
No.
as you went through.
Thanks.
Do you have, off the top of your head, a rough idea when you were talking about the per pupil cost of like 16,000? Do you know what that would be if it was fully loaded with like the town-born like benefits and retirement and all that?
No, that is fully loaded. That's calculated. What happens is the Massachusetts Department of Elementary and Secondary Education annually compiles what's called an end of year report. And so the data comes from the school business manager as well as the town accountant. So
Okay.
all the indirect costs, such as, insurances, property insurance, facilities, everything, all that gets attributed to the schools. And then that becomes the end of year report. And that becomes the per pupil cost. So that way you can look at cross communities, because if communities budgeted different ways, it wouldn't be a valid comparison. Because let's say a community had their own school custodians and facilities department, unlike a town facilities department, if you only capture what was in the school budget, it wouldn't be reflective of the real costs. So no, those numbers are fully loaded
Okay.
and they're reported to the state, and they actually get audited as well.
Okay, thank you. And then when you were flipping through the public safety slides, I
Mhm.
thought it showed one animal control officer. I thought we had two animal control officers, don't we?
We did. One has retired, and so the chief right now is moving forward with one animal control officer.
Okay, with no plans to fill
No
that
plans to replace it, no.
in the near future. Okay. And on the public safety dispatchers union, that is, the contract is open.
Mhm.
Is that, when did that one expire?
That would be fiscal year 19.
Okay,
So yeah, so it's, so we're 2 years into that contract. And we're hopefully, I'd like to get it done for April, but right now we don't have an agreement.
okay, thank you. And then on the Middlesex retirement assessment, when you had the chart up, like the last few years, the increase was like 500 grand, 550, 640. In the current year, it's only 370. Why did that increase? How was there a decrease in the increase, if that makes sense?
John can best explain it because he goes through this with them.
Yeah, one of the considerations is that it's based on a percentage of our actual payroll. And so we believe that our payroll has not gone up at a higher percentage, if you will, as it has in the past.
Okay.
These things tend to even out over time. Just to give the finance committee some perspective, the town manager had mentioned it for a preview for 23. Our increase will be close to about 6.5%. The guidance we've been given by Middlesex is if nothing else changes, we've been told to expect about a 6.5% increase in most years, unless something happens. Like, for example, as the town manager mentioned, you may have an unbelievably great year in the investment markets.
Yep.
But the actuaries use a smoothing formula to prevent ups and downs. So,
Okay, thank you. That's it. Thank you, Paul, John.
Thank you.
Any other questions? All right. I had as part of the agenda, the review of the warrant articles in here, but I think it does make more sense to go straight to the capital plan. And so I'll just entertain a motion to take the capital plan out of order.
I make a motion that we take the capital plan agenda item out of order.
I second it.
All those in favor? Hands are fine.
Aye.
Thank you. All right, John. You're on.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'll select this. I'm just trying to get the presentation back. One moment.
Mhm.
Jim, sorry, I had to stop the screen sharing when I ended Paul's
Okay.
presentation.
Actually, John, is it the same one that you've emailed to us?
Yes.
I have a copy of it. Let me share it and run through for you while you're doing it.
Oh, great. Thank you.
You're welcome.
So this slide we just looked at as a summary of just by functional area. And I thought it'd be helpful tonight, as we mentioned, gave a brief overview at the tri-board meeting. And as you know, Amina represented the finance committee at all the capital planning committee meetings. We reviewed 34 projects and actually recommended a total of 24 for funding. And then if we go to the, I thought it'd be helpful to take a little deeper look at some of these. If we go to the first one on municipal technology, that involves a door security upgrade. So this is a continuation of a prior year project. What's going on here is our technology department is working with several departments to transition over from a mechanical lock system, if you will, to an electronic swipe system or electronic lock. So the two buildings that will be targeted under this project for fiscal year 22 would be the police station and the center fire station. Moving on to the public, excuse me, the next one under community services is the senior center. And that, as we've discussed at some prior meetings, there you see an aerial shot. This is going to fund a complete repaving of the senior center lot. Also, the public works and facilities departments are going to be evaluating the space layout, just where parking is always at a premium. When things return to normal post-COVID, many events, parking is very limited at this facility. So they're going to be examining to see if a different layout or, might accommodate some more spaces and if it will work. So that cost is $316,000. And then moving on to also into community services, the public library, there's a few projects to mention. This is one of our long-term goals, and this is the installation of an emergency generator. As many of us know in the town, from time to time, we do experience some wild weather, and many of us have experienced long duration power outages in the town over the years. So this is going to provide for the purchase and installation of an emergency generator that will power the entire building. The idea is to maintain power during an outage, but also to provide a warm-up or power-up station for residents, so that if we were in a long-duration electricity outage, residents could stop in and power up the cell phones or other portable devices to try to communicate with folks. Moving on to a couple other library projects. This is the phase 3. This is the final phase of carpeting replacement for the building. This was originally in the FY21 capital plan, and it was deferred when a number of items were cut due to COVID. And then also, this is the second year. This is a continuation of their computer replacement program at a cost of just under $38,000. What the library's been doing is replacing their computers in 4 to 5 year cycles. So this is the second of a 2-year phased replacement. And then we move on to public safety. The police department submitted a request for 2 electronic speed and message advisory signs. You can see they're trailer mounted units. The cost is $32,000. You can see that they can be used to monitor speed and also messages could be posted on there, short messages for drivers. The newer version ones, as Chief Spinney explained, they'll have the ability to collect speed data so that the police can analyze the average speed on a certain road or a certain area that they might be studying. So this will greatly assist with speed enforcement and traffic safety. Then we move on to the fire department, a few projects to explain there. The first one is a SUV vehicle replacement. This has been deferred in the past. This replaces a 2008 Ford Explorer. Chief Ryan has experienced significant mechanical problems, transmission problems with this vehicle. So this will be taken out of service. There's also, at a cost of just over $76,000, a older pickup truck that's used as a plow truck for all of the stations will be taken out of service as the frontline vehicle, and it will be repurposed as a backup truck only. And that will replace an older 2002 backup truck. So the idea is to step them down, have a newer frontline vehicle, and then have the backup, at least modernize the backup, just due to the critical nature of the service they provide. And then the next project involves a piece of equipment that's used to lift heavy apparatus such as fire engines. It's a mechanics hydraulic lift. The current unit is about 30 years old. it will not pass and safety inspection, and the cost there is just over 150,000. So that's going to fund the replacement of that unit. And then we move on to Public Works. We have 350 budgeted for sidewalk construction and also 400,000 for road improvements for the coming year. This will, the roads will be based off of the pavement management survey. So the ones in the survey that are, deemed the most critical, those are the ones that will be replaced, resurfaced, if you will, in the coming year. If we go on to the next part of Public Works, there's a 1998 unit. You see at the picture on the left, it's a sidewalk snowplow. That's going to be replaced at a cost of 170,000 just to keep their snow removal equipment for sidewalks modernized. That's a very important piece of equipment, especially in this type of season, to keep the sidewalks clear. The next is a truck that's for the Parks Division. That's been deferred in the past. That's at a cost of 75,000. It's going to replace an older 2008 dump truck. And keeping with the common theme, that 2008 is going to be repurposed as a backup or lighter duty vehicle for emergency use in this for the sewer division as a backup vehicle. Moving on to municipal facilities. This is a building that many of you may have seen if you were to drive behind Chelmsford High School. This is their maintenance shop. And it's an older steel prefab type building. As our Director of Public Works explained, that this houses the municipal facilities maintenance shop. So a lot of their equipment that they use to work on items is in there. The walls and roof are leaking and need to be repaired. And there's also another building that's formerly, it was a former treatment plant that's nearby. It's also in the back near the high school, and that's about 50 years old. And under this same project, right now it's basically used for storage of off-season equipment. So right now, all of their summer equipment is in there. When the seasons flip, their winter snow removal and other equipment will go in this storage building. And so for 110,000, these are some badly needed repairs to these buildings. Moving on to municipal facilities, just to talk about vehicles for a moment. Many of these items have been deferred from prior year capital plans. And basically what we're doing here is we're replacing 3 SUV type vehicles with hybrid SUV vehicles under the Green Communities initiative that we operate under for fuel efficiency. And so this is going to replace a 2012 Ford Escape, a 2012 Jeep Patriot, and then that last one is a typo. That should be a 2013 Ford Escape. And just to explain the line at the bottom to everyone, the 2012 Ford Escape is going to be transitioned to a lighter use with the library. So that will save them from buying a new vehicle. And then the bottom vehicle is also going to be the 2013 Ford Escape will be transferred to the senior center to replace a very old car that they use for medical appointments and transporting people, and that will help them. So although these vehicles are being taken out of service from municipal facilities, they're going to replace some very old units in other departments. And then if we next move into a couple other things on municipal facilities, we have this is actually something that was highlighted as a result of some safety inspections that were done for our OSHA guidelines with our municipal safety coordinator. And there's a number of roof ladders and skylight grates that need to be added. You can see basically just have a small graphic there. They're basically small ladders. They vary in size. So when repair employees are moving from one roof to a different level roof, those ladders are there to be a safety device to try to prevent slips, falls, things of that nature, or accidents. And that's at a cost of 45,000. The next project involves the Chelmsford Center for the Arts, or the CCA, and this is going to add building insulation to try to reduce some energy costs and make that improve the comfort factor in the large meeting room area, and that's at a cost of just under $50,000. And then we move into school facilities. The first one, this was the highest priority from school administration, school committee. This involves replacing door hardware at the Byam School, Harrington School, and Westlands Community Ed Center. And as the picture shows, they're basically what they're doing is this is going to replace older knob style handles with the lever handles that you see there. It's also going to replace them with a more high security type device. Basically, the best way I can explain it is it would allow teachers and staff or students to lock the door from the inside for the added safety should there be an emergency situation in the school. So it will enhance safety throughout the schools. And it will replace some older style of lock hardware. And that cost for those buildings is just under $600,000. Next, a couple more school facilities projects. There's some damaged floor tiles at the Harrington School in the cafeteria area that will need to be replaced. That's the picture on the right. The cost for that's just over $29,000. The picture on the left, it's a little bit dark, but that's at Center School. This project, the cost is just over $30,000, and it's to replace a number of metal partitions that are in the restrooms, between the restroom fixtures. And I'm not sure how well you can see that, but they have rusted and deteriorated. We still think a Center School is just being renovated, but in reality, the major renovation was about 20 plus years ago. So that will complete that project. And then also in school facilities, this is at the Westlands Community Ed Center. This is a continuation of their efforts to remodel the kitchen and food prep areas. You can see the items that are included. As the town manager mentioned, this project will be partially funded by a $75,000 contribution from the Child Care Revolving Fund. And you see that involves new kitchen equipment, some non-slip flooring, as well as new serving lines and furnishings. And that completes that at Westlands. And a couple of more school facilities projects that are important. This next one is at the South Row Elementary School. The cost is just under $76,000. This deals mostly with kitchen ventilation. So this is a code compliance issue where they need to be able to install a energy saving variable speed exhaust system, if you will, for the kitchen. The other project that you see the picture on the right, this is an exterior elevator, a lift that's on the outside of the Parker Middle School. It's several years old. It's at the end of its useful life. The cost to replace that is $127,000. And then finally, in the security and surveillance area, you've seen this is a continuation again. The school administration has been working through a number of schools at different levels, enhancing their security systems. And this is going to take place at basically all of the elementary schools, Byam, Center, Harrington, and South Row. And this allows them to install updated modern security systems that will be tied into police dispatch, as well as new building intrusion systems. And the cost to do those 4 schools is just under $600,000. So that completes, and finally, assuming this may not happen as far as the schedule, if town meeting is postponed, but our the general next step in the process would be town meeting consideration of this capital plan. And then finally, in June, early July, we would issue municipal bonds to fund these, finance these capital improvements. Well, thank you. I'd be glad to answer any questions. That final slide you may have seen before, that's just something that you'll see in the Finance Committee warrant report book. That's just a summary of all the capital projects.
Thank you, John. Does anybody have any questions?
I've got a couple. Sorry, John, not to put you on the spot, and if these are better for Gary, I'll gladly wait and talk to Gary. On the road improvement for the 400 grand, I know that's kind of a consistent number, 450 every year. Is that more for essentially pothole? Like, we're not replacing a road for 400 grand. So is it really just kind of maintenance of existing like potholes and issues with that?
What they've done in years past is they've actually tried to resurface sections of road. So if you were to drive around town in the spring, you may see, rather than do a whole entire road, one of the things that Gary and Steve have tried to do is target a certain stretch of road that maybe just have numerous potholes and resurface that, but they may not do an entire road resurfacing from beginning to end. So my understanding.
That's fine, thank you. And on the next one, for the sidewalk snow remover, do you know, is that a single use vehicle? Like 170 grand for something that you use like 3 months out of the year just to move snow seems like a lot of money for a snow remover.
I know, I'm told, Gary, I can get you more specifics on that, but I'm told that's a multiple use vehicle. They just happened to show it with a plow.
Yeah.
When I zoomed in on the picture, it was a bombardier piece of equipment, but I'm told other attachments can go on that.
Okay, yeah, I assume it's some kind of a Bobcat or little backhoe. Okay. On the I think there was 3 specific ones that you mentioned for the SUV replacements for the EVs that we're going to buy instead. Is there any kind of, as buying that as a municipality, is there any kind of tax or other incentives that we get for buying an electric vehicle?
My understanding is those vehicles are going to be hybrids, so I don't believe any of those SUVs are going to be all electric.
Okay.
That was my understanding.
We don't, the town doesn't get a tax credit. So we, if there are tax credits being offered, it doesn't flow to the town. Right. But we expect to be more state incentive programs. For example, we're now being offered 100% financed, meaning payment for electric vehicle charging stations. So we're looking at adding ones at the McCarthy School and so forth. So you'll be seeing more electric vehicle charging stations being installed in the years ahead. So that's the assistance they provide us. But no, we don't get a tax credit on the vehicles.
Okay. And then the last one is when you were talking about the 45 grand for the ladders and ladder repairs and the grates, do you know the split? It seems a solution in search of a problem that we're going to spend probably thousands of dollars to put grates over a skylight. I can't imagine we've ever had anybody fall through a skylight, but do you know how much we're spending for the 52 skylight grates?
I can get you a breakdown on that. I know that it is the way it was explained to us at Capitol that it was an OSHA requirement. So for example, if Gary calls a company in to repair or go up on, say, the town hall roof, I know I've seen recently a couple of ladders installed, and the worker then accidentally slips and falls through the skylight, then we're liable if we don't have that grate on there. I'm sure that that's one of the driving forces. The other thing is, if you remember back, we've had a couple of light winters, but we experienced some deep snow a few years back, and there was a number of employees that were being asked to shovel off roofs. I'm not going to say it totally in Chelmsford. It was every municipality, and I know that's a concern that this came up. A number of Paul can correct me. I don't believe we had any serious accidents in Chelmsford, but a number of employees in other communities injured themselves trying to shovel off roofs or clear snow off roofs during a deep snowfall. And that was kind of the impetus for this.
Okay, thank you very much.
All right, any other questions? All right, I'm seeing none. Paul, if we can go on the agenda
Sure.
next, back to the presentation of the current draft of the warrant articles. Was that voted on Monday evening?
No, it'll be signed a week from Monday at the select board meeting on the 22nd. They'll be signing the 21st. They'll be signing the warrant for the spring annual town meeting on the 22nd, of February that evening. So we're basically sending final review right now by town council. It'll go out in the packets next Thursday, and I'll send it to you at that time. So basically a week from today, we'll have the final version of print form of the warrant. But right now there's 42 articles, and recognizing that you're an hour and a half into your meeting of other things, I'll go over them at a surface level just to give you and the community a flavor of what we're looking for, if that's okay. I just want to post that list up. I won't go into the text of the articles, but you can just sort of follow on. The first one is all town meetings, is reports of town officers and committees. Obviously, there's no financial impact there. Second one would be any amendments to the current fiscal year operating budget to get us through June 30th. And there always are some, and we'll pull those together as we near the approach of town meeting. We'll work with the town accountant and department heads. Again, as John noted, depending on when the town meeting is held. And again, I think the expectation at this point in time is similar to what's happened in Westford. The town meeting will probably be postponed till mid-June. So again, we'll see where we are as we near there, and provide you with that data as it gets closer to the end of the fiscal year to close things out. The next article is funding for collective bargaining agreements. Again, that's a placeholder in the event that we achieve resolution on the 2 outstanding contracts by the time of town meeting. Number 4 is the Nashoba Tech assessment. Again, Nashoba Tech will be there. They'll provide the assessment, and then we allow them to move on, because some cases there have been multiple town meetings on the same evening. And that again could happen this year with things being delayed. And Article 5 is the Chelmsford Public Schools operating budget for the upcoming fiscal year. Article 6 is then the general government operating budget for the upcoming fiscal year. Article 7 would be the Finance Committee Reserve Fund. Article 8 is the fiscal year 22 capital budget that John just presented. Article 9 is a placeholder for Chelmsford Public Schools HVAC repairs and upgrades. As was discussed at the tri-board meeting, and an update was actually provided to the school committee last meeting, we are doing a comprehensive assessment of the school department HVAC systems in all of the school buildings, because it's obviously an important situation, not only for air quality, but certainly in a COVID environment. In fact, the selectmen Monday evening, confirmed a bid award to do air balancing in all the school buildings. So right now, the systems in the buildings have been essentially almost 100% inspected. I think they're still doing the rooftop units at the high school, but weather's delayed that with the snow. But they're basically going into all the rooms, doing the repairs, doing the assessments and the upgrades. I would expect probably within a couple of weeks, we may have a handle in terms of what amount is needed. The good news is yes, COVID will go away, but the good news is these systems, which will have the better filters and be fully functioning, will provide for additional health in the schools going forward for seasonal flu and just air quality, but making sure we're getting the proper amount of outdoor air, the proper filtering, air exchange, and so forth. So that's that article, the placeholder. The next one, Article 10, is the placeholder for funding for the engineering work that's going on right now regarding elevated levels of PFAS at the 54 Richardson Road site. Right now, in our groundwater monitoring over there, we came up with elevated levels of these, sort of forever chemicals, as we call them, which the federal government has now put standards in terms of water quality, and obviously the state has adopted those as well. So we're doing a site assessment, which is currently being reviewed by the Massachusetts Department of Environmental Protection for a response action. We expect comments on that response action within a couple of weeks. So again, I think within a period shortly thereafter, we'll have not only the response action plan, but what the cost may be. And again, this is an effort that's going to start this fiscal year, but will extend into the upcoming fiscal year. Again, depending upon the results. I mean, basically what we're looking at is installing additional monitoring wells, soil samples and so forth around the perimeter of the 54 Richardson Road property to get a better understanding of where these chemicals are, where they're trending, and then over time, seeing if they're coming from off-site sources and what have you. So again, that's a a cost that's undefined at this time, but we'll keep you updated. Article 11 goes into the enterprise funds. The first one is the fiscal year 22 sewer enterprise budget. The Article 12 then goes into basically capital under the enterprise funds. There's a request for a purchase and borrowing for a sewer vacuum truck and a sewer utility truck. So again, we'll go into those details when Gary Persichetti and Public Works Group comes in and talks about the DPW budgets as well as the enterprise funds. Article 14 is the stormwater enterprise fund operating budget. This is the third and final year of what's really a ramp up now of the stormwater department and division operations. So there's an increase, the final increase of a work crew and staffing. Right now, those standards are in place, and they're certainly not going to change under the current administration in Washington. All the litigation that was related to the implementation of the new stormwater situation, one of which the city of Lowell was a very active party, all that has been resolved. So this is here, it's with us, it's known, and we're basically going to be in compliance as part of the efforts to keep the groundwater and clear and properly treated. And related to that are a couple of is an article in terms of the Dunshire Drive culverts. We have a placeholder. We're also seeking state grant funding on this, so it's uncertain at this time. But again, as we get closer in the weeks and a couple months ahead, we may have a stronger handle in terms of what that cost will be to complete that project. We got a grant to do the engineering work. That's been satisfactorily completed. This was, under the state funding programs and so we'll continue to seek state funding. And there may be a portion that may be funded by the community as part of a match, or worst case, if there's no funding available, the entire cost. That was a project in which the Secretary of Executive Office of Environmental Affairs was out in the community as part of the launching of their program a few years back. So again, they funded the design portion, but we're still waiting for a funding commitment on the municipal vulnerability program for the construction portion. Moving on from that, is related to stormwater is a stormwater vacuum truck, which is different than the sewer vacuum truck. And DPW can explain to you that they're basically, even though they have the same name of vacuum truck, they're totally differently designed, and they perform different functions. And if you can really think about it, you really wouldn't want people using a sewer truck who weren't dealing with sewer issues for sanitary and health reasons. So again, that's a borrowing. It would be funded by the Stormwater Enterprise Fund through debt. So again, that will be presented. We now move on to the enterprise funds for the forum under Article 17, the Public Educational Government or Cable Access Enterprise Fund under 18, and then the Golf Course Enterprise under 19. We then, under Article 20 is a request from the Board of Health to create a new revolving fund for on-site sewage. And basically what this is the fact that that there now is the ability to install septic tanks in certain areas of the community during the sewer moratorium and such. We don't know what the activity would be during a given year. So like, for example, a subdivision was just approved for 6 houses. We don't know when those may be built, so we don't budget for that in the Board of Health budget. But what would happen is when they come in for the plan design review and approval and inspections, the applicant would pay those costs into a revolving fund, of which the fund would then pay for the inspectors and plan review going out. So it has no impact on the tax base or the tax burden, but the users of that are paying a revolving fund, much like the others, for those ongoing costs. So that's the proposal, is to establish a new revolving fund for that purpose. And again, where we have an uncertain amount, we just chose $75,000 as a realistic estimate on what may be a high end in any given year. Because again, they have to be annually renewed, which is the purpose of the next article, which is the annual authorization of the departmental revolving funds in Article 21, which the state requires us to annually reauthorize. So again, this is probably another one of those consent agenda items, because it doesn't change, but we just have to vote them annually. Article 32 is the Cemetery Improvement and Development Fund. Again, that's the ongoing work with the cemetery expansion. Again, another article that's very ripe for consent agenda to, again, shorten the and be efficient with the town meeting. So take it up under consolidated item with other low debate or no debate items. Then there's the Community Action Program Fund. Again, tends to be a $10,000 annual appropriation. And then there's the Affordable Housing Stabilization Fund, which again is that we did that the last town meeting. The mechanics of taking the money that's been collected and depositing it into the Housing Stabilization Fund. And then again, as we noted, if it ever has to be expended, you have to go back to town meeting for an article. So again, another good article for the consent agenda. Article 25 is the Community Preservation Fund, general article where we basically vote the debt service, the annual administration expenses for the committee, as well as setting funds into the required funding components of open space, historic resources, and community housing, and budgeted reserve. So again, this omnibus article is annual, and again, we'll have the date, the latest estimates based on fiscal 22. And then below that are two articles that would seek funding from the Community Preservation Fund. The first one is for under Article 26 is for the purchase and installation of new playground equipment at Varney Playground and at Southwell Park. Even though the two separate projects, it's probably more efficient to discuss them since they're in that area of town, and obviously they can be split up or amended, but again, trying to keep the warrant somewhat short as I can. That's what's being requested here. Obviously the amount for the, will be taken up by the Community Preservation Committee. They're meeting next week, and then again they'll make their request to you. And then similar, the next one is for the Warren Pole property parking lot. The town has completed the acquisition of the Warren Pole property. The Conservation Commission gave a preliminary report of the results of the hearings and meetings and discussions on how the property would be utilized. And one of the critical components is the provision of parking to access the property. They presented the other evening to the select board, and I'm sure they can present to you. They're looking at two parking areas. The first one is on Parker Road, which would be an expansion of the parking at the Wright Reservation lot, which actually would directly connect to the Warren Pole property. And then the other access and parking area is off of Boston Road, and where the barn is. If many of you took the time to visit that opportunity, it's the entrance off of Boston Road. There's a barn and parking area there, and again, there's some costs to create a parking area at that location. Then moving on from that is a petition article, citizen petition article for a resolution for a town meeting to support a climate change act. Again, this is a very contemporary topic. The state is in the midst of doing its energy and climate plan for the future. It's a bill that the legislature sent to the governor at the end of the last session. He didn't like some components of it, so it didn't get enacted into law. The legislature in the new session has quickly sent it back to the governor. The governor sent his amendments back, and I would expect over the weeks ahead, the state's plan will come into future, and then obviously at the local level, we have an active group that the petitioner is a member of, who'll be seeking a resolution for the town on climate change. Moving on from that, under Article 29 we get into general bylaw amendments. The first one is to following up the change to the charter that was adopted by the legislature, is to change references in the general bylaws and then the zoning bylaws from Board of Selectmen to Select Board. So that will happen under those two articles. Again, that's it just has to be voted because all these things, these bylaws are tracked and recorded by the Attorney General's office and at the so we have to formally take those actions, and we really awaited the enactment of the law amending the charter, and told people we would then come back and do the bylaws, zoning in general. Article 31 is a stormwater management bylaw. That's a model bylaw that was drafted with the assistance of the Northern Middlesex Council of Governments. They had a model bylaw for again, what's now the new stormwater management best practices. And so with the bylaw, and it's lengthy, it goes on for pages and pages. So again, that would basically, provide direction and clarity in terms of stormwater management moving forward. And then the next one after that is a a general bylaw regarding grinder pumps. It's a citizen petition article, which seeks to basically codify into the bylaws the practice that's in place today and has been in place since the resolution of the litigation with the Sewer Fairness Alliance. So again, this just puts into the town's bylaws the basically the decision and the decree that came out from the federal complaint. So again, it's not a material change; it's just a codification. And again, that was submitted by Dave Foley. And then beyond that, we then go to an article to transfer parcels that are near Freeman Lake, and there's a list of them, and we'll have maps of them. But there's a hodgepodge of articles that, in the interest of, again, watershed protection and resource protection, to transfer those parcels, many of which were tax title parcels and so forth, but to formally transfer those to the Conservation Commission as opposed to just being held for general municipal purposes. So again, there's no cost involved. It's just a conversion of the management of those parcels. Article 34 is for town meeting to accept easements that were granted through the planning board's actions for the approval of Gristmill 1, or I guess Gristmill at this point, is for that approval. And so those have all been, there's an easement agreement and a map, which will be an appendix to this warrant, that again, town meeting has to vote to accept those easements. Article 35 are proposed easements for the construction of sidewalks on Turnpike Road that basically go from where the current construction is at the traffic signal, basically up towards Warren Avenue. So work's been done out there in terms of survey work, and then there'll be some easements taken to construct those sidewalks that were funded by a state grant. And then Article 36 is for the consideration of the easements that would be needed to modify and improve the intersection at Ledge Road and Dunstable Road. That's the whole issue of truck traffic coming out from Ledge Road. It's very difficult to go left if you're heading towards Tingsboro and the Route 3 interchange in that way. So that would require a taking from the residential property owner at that location. Now we get into zoning bylaw amendments that are active before the planning board. And I believe the planning board had brief discussion last evening and is continuing their public hearing on this, but they have a series of 4 bylaws that are under consideration. One is to amend their zoning bylaw regarding the village center overlay parking requirements. Again, I think it's to make them more strict, to require more parking under the center village overlay. That's Article 37. Article 38 is to amend the town's zoning bylaw to specifically define e-commerce and to regulate e-commerce. Right now, the closest you have to e-commerce is sort of warehousing and so forth, but obviously as society changes and now there's these e-commerce distribution centers and fulfillment centers and so forth, it's really to make that clear and regulate that in the town's zoning bylaws in terms of what's retail, what's non-retail, and so forth. So again, the final wording on this is being resolved, and then there'll be discussion on that. And then you get into 2 zoning bylaws regarding recreational marijuana or accessory uses. Right now, any activity regarding recreational marijuana is prohibited in the town. What the planning board is proposing at this point in time is to allow recreational marijuana or accessory uses, meaning anything other than sales. So it could be cultivation, R&D, what have you, other than sales. And so they do it into 2 articles. One is to a bylaw that allows the recreational marijuana or accessory uses and locations and so forth. And then the other article is to make sure it's clear that recreational sales are not allowed. So that's the final article under the zoning change. And then what results of that is that our general bylaws also prohibit recreational or non-medical marijuana activities. So then there would have to be an amendment to that bylaw in order to comply, align your zoning bylaw with your general bylaws of the community. And then the last article is Article 42, which is street acceptances. I believe there's a couple that may be available for consideration this spring. So it's a lengthy warrant. It's 42 articles. It's larger than we typically have. I think 27 of them are sort of financial. My sense is we're probably looking at a 3-session town meeting. That's my hope. I mean, I think we all like it to be done sooner, but it certainly can't be rushed. There's a lot there. And so that's why I think if town meeting is postponed till June, it'll probably be postponed till mid-June, probably like the 21st of June, because if that's the case, the kids should be out of school, given that they're not incurring snow days. So we don't have the issue of conflicting with the student use of the schools. But it would allow you 4 sessions before you went into the 4th of July. And then you'd have the warmer weather with the doors open and everything that we had last year. And but that's sort of my expectation is that if the town meeting, the warrant will say the April, because that's what our bylaws require. And what would happen is similar to last year, somebody would go with the moderator the night of the traditional last Monday in April and then move to continue it till June. And again, my sense is at this point, you're probably looking at June 21st. I don't think you want to go any later because you don't want to, rush the town meeting. I think you probably need at least 3 sessions to get through what we've described. So that's an overview. And again, as I said to you, a week from now, once the warrant is finalized, it'll be put in, I'll send it out to you. And then when it's signed, I'll notify you that it's signed on Monday, the 22nd of February. So it'll be a big warrant book, especially when you've got zoning articles and long stormwater articles and appendices and so forth. So it'll be a rather lengthy book this year.
Yep. All right. Thanks, Paul. Appreciate it. Moving right along in our agenda this evening, now that we've gone through the substantive presentations, we have, as we do every year, our reorganization discussion and vote. And although Amina is not here this evening, we do have the balance of our board here. So if we want to proceed with that discussion, I'm happy to do so.
I'm fine to proceed.
David, you're muted.
I'd make a motion to nominate Jim as chairperson extraordinaire.
I second.
Are there any other nominations?
This was a perfect time to stick it to Amina.
Hearing none. Do we have close the nominations? Do we have a vote? All those in favor?
Aye.
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 I'm abstaining.
What are we in favor of?
I continue on this year.
Yes.
So going forward, we'll also have a reorganization vote for our vice chair. Do you have any nominations?
I would like to nominate Anita for vice chair.
I
I'll
second.
second.
Are there any other nominations?
Does anybody else want to be vice chair before I nominate somebody? Eric?
I'm fine if you continue on, or it doesn't matter. I'm not gonna. Either way.
Does anybody want it? Like, I'm happy to nominate somebody. I don't mind doing it, but I am happy to nominate someone who wants to try it out.
If you don't mind continuing, I'm fine to let you continue.
Okay.
All right. Not hearing any other nominations, I'll close the nomination period. All those in favor of Anita serving as vice chair again this year?
Aye.
Aye.
All right.
Okay.
Seats don't change.
As Well, they might.
Like Groundhog Day. Moving along in our agenda, we have discussion of liaison assignments for the fiscal year 2022 budget review, and that also obviously includes the warrant articles as well. So let me just pull up and share the updated liaison list. We can take a look at what we had last year and see if we're going to make any changes. All right. Can we all see the document?
Yep.
All right. So currently, Board of Health, Anita, you served as that liaison. Do you want to continue doing that? Anyone else want to serve in that position? You're muted, Anita.
Oh,
I don't mind continuing.
Okay. Capital planning, Amina's already served admirably in that role. I would say that's one of the heavier lifting ones. So we thank her for that. Cemetery, David, you've done that in the past. Do you want to continue serving?
Sure. Be more than happy to.
Perfect. All right, Chelmsford Public Schools. This is one of the large ones, obviously. Kathy and David, you both did that last year. Do you want to continue in that? And does anyone else want to join them?
I definitely want to continue with the school department.
Likewise.
Eric, Vicky, and Anita, do you guys want to jump on with them, or I'm fine with them? They've done a great job themselves. So
If you need me to, I would. If not, I'm fine where I am.
Vicky, I think last year you were going to join us, but I can't remember, scheduling came in the way or something, so.
Yeah, the schedule that was given to me was the wrong schedule, but I'm happy to jump in. I was on vacation when you actually did meet with them.
oh, that's what happened. Yes. So Vicky, I'm adding you to that group, and I think that makes sense because down below we also have all three of you on the Nashoba Valley School District, and if you all want to continue in that, I think it makes sense for both of you, both groups, to continue that role.
Yeah, I don't need to be on Nashoba.
You don't need to be on Nashoba. Okay.
Maybe Nashoba doesn't need me.
Oh, I apologize. It was Eric. I apologize. Eric, you were on Nashoba.
Yep.
Kathy, they'll definitely miss you.
I know.
All right. Community Preservation Fund. Kathy, you want to keep on that group?
Yeah, I'm fine with everything that I've got. If someone else would like to meet with Linda, that's good too. So I mean, it is kind of interesting, but you know.
Well, let me ask this then, because we have all of the budget meetings up on the screen right now. Are there any that people would like to join that they aren't currently on? And in the alternative, are there any that they're currently on they'd like to move off of?
I'm fine with all the ones I have to continue. At the same time, if anybody wants to change of pace, I'm happy to entertain a swap.
Sounds like it sounds like we're all pretty set.
Or if somebody wants another set of hands, I know, and you've got a lot of the town ones. If those are.
Yeah, but mine they're all together though. They're pretty quick because I meet with John and we go over them and they're boom, boom, boom. So like it looks like a lot, but it really isn't.
Okay.
Yeah, and keep in mind it's going to look a lot different this year. Most likely, we're looking at FaceTime and Zoom or telephone calls, depending on when we meet and how we meet. But I'm guessing that'll be the most common version. So things that required a drive and a set time will be a little bit, I think, easier to schedule this go around, and may offer new times to do that where they haven't in the past. So I know, Eric, I think we're going to have some heavy lifting with not only the 4 sections we do for DBW, waste, sewer, and storm, but also there are a lot of articles later on that that Gary and Steve will be going over with us in this, such as the vacuum trucks and the easements, things like that, where I think we'll be able to knock that out pretty efficiently in say a Zoom meeting or a FaceTime meeting or a Microsoft Teams meeting, however we end up doing it.
Okay. Yeah, I'm fine with what I got, but again, if anybody wants either a second set of hands or wants to swap, just give a shout.
Okay.
On the school department, I get an email that they're having their public hearing meeting. I don't know if it's next Tuesday or they're gonna, I can check my email, but just so you know, they already have some sort of presentation planned if we want to tune into that, as well as have our private session. I don't know if anybody else got that email. Let me just check.
Yeah, I think Deborah Phillips sent it out.
Yep.
Is it virtual? I am actually in Florida for the week, but happy to call in while in Florida.
I'm positive it's virtual. They said the school committee will be there, but everybody else just tunes in. Yes, here it is.
Yep, here it is. So,
thank you.
sorry, not to jump on your toes here, Kathy, but the letter says that the budget hearing on the fiscal year 22 recommended budget will be on Tuesday, February 23rd at 6 p.m. at the CPS administration office. They will conduct an in-person meeting on the date. However, all public participation will take place remotely, not in person.
Yeah.
It's not open to the public for in-person participation, which makes sense. And there's a link in that email. That email was sent by Debbie Phillips. It looks like this past Friday. So you all should have a copy of that. If you don't, let me know. Just email me and I can forward it to you. I know it definitely went out to all the town meeting reps. I'm not sure if it went out to all members on our committee.
All right, thank you. I'll look for that.
Okay. All right. So it looks like we've set the assignments. As you can see here, there are going to be a lot of articles we're going to have to go over as well. We touched upon a bunch of them with Paul tonight, and we'll certainly be able to finalize once the warrant is signed next week by the select board, or the following week by the select board. We'll have a final version. But like I said, a lot of these HVAC repairs, PFAS, sewer vacuum trucks, sewer utility truck, those will be quick ones we can go over when we're meeting with the departments. Likewise, Kathy, Varney Playground, Southwell Playground, Warren Pole, those are things that you'd obviously be able to talk to Linda about when you meet with the CPF. And then we can certainly reach out to the select board on theirs, although they're just been general bylaw amendments. I don't think that we'll need to even address those. It's just changing new language. But we do have 2 citizen petitions. One's with Bernard Kosicki for the climate change resolution. The other is with David Foley for the general bylaw amendment regarding grinder pumps. And then finally, we'll probably have a member of the Concom come in and talk to us about just a transfer of those parcels, get a map, see an idea of what is actually being transferred, what their plans are for just maintaining those parcels. And I'm sorry, not finally, but there's a big chunk of planning board items, which I'm sure we'll want to have the planning board, members of the planning board come in and talk to us once they've finalized their votes on those, which I don't think will happen likely until we're into the March area.
Does anybody know why they would bring up the marijuana issue? I mean, how is that under the purview of the zoning bylaws when town meeting already voted no?
It certainly have to be a question for the planning board as to what the impetus was behind this. I'm imagining that there has been some since it's been a couple of years since that vote. And since the local option was made, and since we as a town meeting made that vote, I imagine as time has gone on, it's been implemented. There's been questions that have been approached by the planning board. They may be looking to address those questions. But again, it is under their purview to at least present an article if they're seeing applications come in that they just can't entertain because of the current bylaw structure. And so a discussion with them once they finalize these will certainly probably give us a little better understanding as to what their ideology is behind it. All right. So that brings us to discussion of the budget hearing and Springtown meeting, a warrant article schedule. So I know, and thank you, Pam, sent a schedule today for what would be a normal schedule of our meetings in order to review the budget, to have our warrant article hearings. And given the length of the warrant, as we expect it to be lengthy, this would be a year where if we were under that normal schedule, I think it would be a little bit of a time crunch. But I think we should proceed, given the fact that the budget's already in place and pretty much finalized, the proposed budget, that we can proceed now with the understanding that we may have some wiggle room if, say, the planning board's taking a little longer to make their votes, or if someone can't make it to one of our meetings coming up, and keep that in mind in our scheduling. Normally, we wouldn't have a meeting next week, just because it's February vacation week. However, we're also in a world where we have Zoom meetings and no in-person meetings either. So my question to all of you is, if we are able to have anybody ready to come in next week, would there be an appetite to have what would probably likely be a short meeting next week to start this process and to go through the first round of review? Does anyone oppose? I know you're traveling, Vicky. It might be difficult for you to attend, but
I can check. If our schedule permits it, I would certainly attend.
Okay. All right. Well, so why don't we reach out to our liaison assignments, see who can meet, and then I would have to post by midday on Tuesday our proposed agenda for a Thursday night meeting. So if I haven't heard back from anybody saying yes, no, we have people lined up that can meet, then we may just push off to the following Thursday anyway.
Just a reminder, Monday's a legal holiday, so the departments won't be available in the buildings on Monday.
Okay, so we might not have anybody available to come and meet next Thursday, but let's reach out and see who's available for our assignments, and we'll make a final call on Tuesday midday whether or not we have a meeting next Thursday. The following Thursday, definitely we want to line people up for the final Thursday in February. And then we normally have a meeting on the first Thursday in March. However, especially with the ways these are all Zoom hearings, the way things are going, the first Thursday of the month is the appeals board meetings. And those have been well watched and attended. And I think we've had a request from CTM, if we don't need to hold one that night, it helps them greatly with conflicts for airing us and making sure we have a proper coverage for these meetings. So I'd like to skip that first Thursday in March if possible, and then move along with the following Thursdays, given that we probably and likely do have some wiggle room as far as when we need to make our vote and produce our book. Does anyone have a problem with that? Any issues with that?
I think that all sounds good, Jim. Sorry, back to next week. You've basically got a day and a half then to align something, schedule it, have the meeting, and commit that we're going to be ready to go on Thursday. I don't even know if that's worth attempting, unless
we could certainly. Well, I say this: we can certainly reach out and see if anybody is available. Because keep in mind, the meeting with that department doesn't have to happen by Tuesday midday, but it has to be scheduled prior to our Thursday meeting so I can put it onto the agenda. So if someone wants to meet Wednesday or even Thursday by Zoom or by FaceTime or something like that, and they have the ability to do that next week, as long as I know that's going to happen and we can put it onto the agenda, it doesn't have to be completed before our actual meeting that evening.
Okay.
So I know it's a little bit of a crunch time, and normally we'd skip ahead, but given that we've had a request to not do the first Thursday in March, and we're starting a little bit later than usual, I think at least asking, it doesn't hurt to ask.
So I guess then for folks that are reaching out to your contacts, in addition to seeing if you could meet, it's also confirming that they could come in and meet with us on Thursday.
Correct.
Right, you got to do that in advance too.
Correct. Thanks, Eric. All right. So we'll keep an eye on the schedule. I'll circulate our updated liaison list to everyone. We can start putting dates into that as well. As far as public comment, there is no public on that I see right now, unless any of our presenters have anything to add, which they do not. There is no press. Oh, I'm sorry, Paul, did you want to add something? Okay. So there is no press, so I'll entertain a motion to adjourn.
I'll make a motion that we adjourn the meeting.
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
All right.
Thank you, everyone. Have a good evening. We'll see you maybe next week.